Hi guys, hope you're doing well. Looking forward to another crazy deep dive into the really odd and quirky thoughts that I have. So today's video is comparing Britain to an East Asian country that is incredibly similar. It's Japan. And the reason for this video is Japan's foreign baby boom. And this is a video on why we need to take notice. So let's get into it. Let's figure out what I'm talking about and let's see what we can learn from Japan. So, this video came about because I read an article in The Guardian this week, and the headline was Japan's baby boom among foreign born population spotlights demographic time bomb. So, the article was by Justin McCurry. And I will put a link down here, and there's a little snapshot of up here so you can have a look at it. So, Britain, Japan, and baby boom. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I did a video about immigration and Britain's aging population and kind of why all these things intersected and why they could potentially be posing problems for us. So let's get to the bottom of this. And what does this have to do with Britain, Japan's foreign baby boom? So, what are our similarities? So, Japan is a polite, punctual nation that's a bit wary of outsiders, and Britain is a polite, punctual nation also a bit wary of outsiders. Both have tea, both have declining birth rates, and both quietly rely on immigration to keep things running over, actually, but would rather pretend that they don't. Interesting. So, what happens when two of the world's most self contained islands realize that they can't actually do this on their own and they need some outside help? And this is what this video is about. So, Japan's population is shrinking fast. And they're now celebrating their imported baby boom. So, children born to foreign mothers. But this isn't just Japan's story, interestingly enough. It could potentially be our story too. And I've talked about Britain's aging population and that we're not kind of keeping up with the aging population by repopulating in accordance to previous decades. So, what happens when proud old island nations realize that the future actually depends on people they once tried to keep out? So, this is what we're going to look at. This is what we're going to talk about. And this is what I'm going to be explaining in our video today. So, you might be wondering what exactly links Britain and Japan? Well, quite a lot actually. And I've always drawn parallels between these two countries. So, let's go into what links us and what makes us similar. And before you say that, well, they're an Asian country, we're a European country, different cultures, but actually there are some ideologies that are pretty similar between us, and that this is what this video is about. So first of all, Japan is an island, in fact, a series of islands off the coast of East Asia, and Britain is an island on the west coast of Europe. So we are both island nations, okay? And therefore, our identity is based on being an island. We have water all around us. We are separate from the mainland. And therefore, this kind of isolation idea is perhaps more prevalent in our countries than other, like landlocked countries that are in mainland Europe or mainland Asia. So, in Britain, we stood alone. We fought the Germans in World War II. The sea is our shield. It's a symbol of independence. But actually, Japan was the same, and it had a very isolationist policy, the Sakoku, which ran from the 1600s to the 1850s. And this, again, meant that they had this kind of idea of no outsiders coming in. The paradox was that the sea kept other people out, but it also allowed trade, control, and cultural exports. So Japan was able to culturally export, and we certainly know that Britain was able to culturally export. I mean, how many countries in the world have English as a second language or a lingua franca? Don't know why I sang that. It was obviously a crazy moment there. So both islands oscillate between splendid isolation and actually global ambition. And, that's pretty cool. So they love the idea of being an island, but they're small and they're mighty, unique, but worldly. And until the world knocks on the door and says, you need more people, they're not really going to invite anybody in. So that's certainly one of the first parallels that Britain and Japan share. So, what else unites these countries culturally? Well, naval power and pride. Did you know that Japan has a great naval history, very similar to British naval history? And they both once ruled their waves. Britain was this idea that the sun never sets on the British Empire because our navies had went off around the world and colonized many places. But Japan too became an Asian imperial power and was dominant at the sea, especially in the late 1800s to World War II. The sea power meant national pride, identity, and it led to modernization for both countries, actually. Both tied military and moral strength to the idea of purity and discipline. And so your empire is built on ships. It actually feels like the world's your oyster. The ocean is your safe space. And until globalization turns it into a superhighway to migration. So maybe not so much liking it when it's flipped and reversed. So both countries had these strong naval powers, but actually they also had empires and, ambition to expand beyond their islands. So as we know, Britain colonized, India, parts of China, America at one point, Canada, Australia. There's lots of places, and we could draw a really long list of places that we kind of know about our own history. But actually, Japan itself was the same. It colonized Korea. In fact, there's quite a brutal history involving Korea and Japan. So if you're interested, do a bit of research on that. Taiwan and actually parts of China. And we also know, obviously, their kind of part in World War II. So they were a dominant, colonizing, strong empire. And they both built identities around being civilizers, bringing order and culture abroad, or colonizers who brought their own culture because they felt that it was superior to the cultures of the places that they were colonizing, rightly or wrongly. And they both experienced a post imperial identity crisis. So after World War II, Britain was starting to think about who are we without our empires when we started to give some of our colonies their, well deserved independence and freedom. And Japan was obviously feeling similarly after their World War II defeat and having to kind of think about how can we become a modern nation without dominating the world. And obviously, they went on to be quite successful. It reformulated themselves as a modern country, as did Britain. But now they're both post empire islands struggling to define their kind of global roles and to reconcile their pride with their dependency on others. So we're not quite recognizing that our economic, demographic, and is all linked to the importance of migrants and being a kind of a global country and exchanging these things with other countries and not being kind of so isolationist. Another thing that Japan shares with us is an aging population and a demographic decline. So the median age in Japan is 49 and the population is shrinking fast. In UK, however, it's 41, but it's rising sharply. Both face worker shortages in key industries like care, health, and manufacturing. Both are reluctant to promote large scale immigration, though it is actually the logical fixer of this problem. And both have political parties using national identity as a shield against demographic realities. Like, we need to deal with these problems, but let's blame other people for them rather than the problems at hand. So, Japan's getting older faster, and Britain's catching up, actually. And both countries are full of grandparents and politicians pretending that immigration is actually optional or even a problem when it is currently the only solution. So we're also countries that are kind of very culturally conservative. This idea of British stiff upper lip and politeness, and equally, this is the kind of similar to Japan, who also have a hierarchical structure, respecting their elders, is politeness and conformity. So we have these similarities: social order, politeness, know your place kind of mentalities. However, both of these cultures are very reliant on outsiders to keep the system running. And we haven't kind of realized that. So, nurses from the Philippines, fruit pickers from Eastern Europe, or factory workers from Vietnam, both countries need to acknowledge that these external factors are important in keeping everything flowing nicely. And public discourse kind of lags behind the reality. Migrants are already part of the system, but they're not included in the story or even celebrated for their part in the story. Another interesting point is that both countries sensationalize migration. foreigners are changing the nation is often like a narrative that is heard in Japan, whereas in Britain it's small boats and net migration figures and, kind of ruining our culture. So again, this links back to that island mentality and that kind of isolationist ideology. I think if you're in a mainland continent like Europe and Asia, there is a lot more kind of mobility and movement, and borders have sometimes changed, haven't they? They've not always been kind of so firmly confirmed, and it's more tribal, isn't it? It's more like groups of ethnicities, and certain parts of and certain countries can have very varied groups of individuals within one country, if you think about Spain or some of the Slavic countries. And I think maybe we've kind of missed out on that here in the UK or Britain because we kind of don't always understand that. I mean, I know we've talked about this Welsh and Scottish and English kind of sharing quite a lot of space, and obviously Ireland's included in this, and Northern Ireland. But we don't seem to be that kind of accommodating when it comes to anyone that isn't within the British Isles. And I suppose it's the same for Japan. They're this island and they're looking across over at the rest of Asia and not feeling kind of maybe that connection or the importance of kind of being, particularly, expansive in their views about how they're dependent on foreigners helping to maintain and support their economy and their society. So it's kind of interesting, these like myths that they've, the national myth of being a self-reliant island, but actually the modern need to have an open economy and therefore the importance of migration. So that was kind of me drawing up some parallels between Britain and Japan, and I think they are pretty clear. Maybe you disagree with me, but I certainly can see the similarities. So how does this link to the baby boom in Japan? Like, well, what am I getting at here? So the baby boom is actually an imported baby boom. So last year, more than 22,000 babies were born to foreign parents there. So that's over 3% of all births, which is the highest ever recorded. And they're celebrating that because they need to repopulate. It's headline news: world's most closed country quietly opening its nursery doors and letting in these little infants that aren't not, of Japanese origin. But before we roll our eyes and think, oh, okay, that's interesting, we're heading in the same direction, guys. And we need to be aware of that and how important it is and how we should be celebrating it too. So, as I've said, Japan's population is shrinking fast. In 2024, they recorded just 686,000 births, which is the lowest number in over a century. And that's 41,000 fewer than the year before. That's big numbers. 41,000 fewer births. And their fertility rate? Well, about 1.15 children per woman. And this has gone way below the 2.1 needed just to keep the population stable. So it isn't looking great in Japan, is it, if those numbers continue to decline? So what happens when a proud workaholic nation runs out of workers and therefore babies? Well, it needs to start importing, and they need to be celebrating that fact. So okay, that's Japan. What's the rest of this got to do with Britain? Because here in Britain, our fertility rate is 1.41, and that's the lowest since records began here in 1938. Okay, so we're following suit. This is what I'm saying. And the Office for National Statistics say it's been falling for 3 years straight. So this is a downward trend, people. Downward trend. And by 2050, 1 in 4 of us will be over 65. And I've shared this statistic before. That's 25% of the population are going to be over 65. So a quarter of the population are maybe not. Like Japan, we're living longer, we're having fewer children, and relying on migrant workers to keep our economy and our care homes running. And we know how important those care homes are going to be, especially when everybody is in 2050 going to be like hitting that 65 and going. So it's really important for us to take note of this and to learn from it and to think about how it can relate to us. So some facts and statistics, as I like to always back up what we're talking about here. So the UK's replacement rate, which is the rate needed to maintain population without migration, is commonly considered to be about 2.1 children per woman. So similar to Japan. However, as I've said, it's 1.41. So again, those aren't healthy figures. We are having half a child less, over half a child less than we need to. The UK government acknowledges that falling fertility plus losing longevity means that the population is aging. And this is the Institute for Fiscal Studies, also the government.uk. So there's quite a few sources that cite that statistic. And the projection that by 2050, 1 in 4 people in the UK will be aged over 65 is commonly recorded as well, obviously government statistics. And the UK's population growth in coming years is forecast to be driven entirely by net migration. This is what's going to happen because natural change, births minus deaths, is flat or negative. And this is parliamentary research and also has been published in the Financial Times as well. So yeah, that picture isn't looking great. And as said, Japan's fertility rate is slightly lower than ours at 1.15. And this has been from the Japan Times. And in 24, Japan recorded its lowest number of births in more than a century. And this is again published in the Japan Times and also has been published in The Guardian as well. So we've got 2 references of this data. So we know that it's like secure. And 3.2% of all births in 24 were actually foreign parents, and that was actually 22,878 babies. And this is actually referenced in the Guardian article that I shared at the start of the video. So yeah, those are the facts, those are the figures, that's the reality of the situation that we're dealing with here. So what are kind of our closing thoughts here then? So what can we learn from all this? Well, I think we need to realize that the future belongs to the open. This isn't a problem, this is a possibility, isn't it? So we know that Japan's demographic time bomb is a warning, and therefore here in the UK, we need to be thinking about it. And we can see the parallels between our 2 island states. We've both got aging populations, and we're probably clinging to glory days and those myths of self-sufficiency that we actually don't have. And the question isn't whether migration changes us, it's whether refusing it might end us. And that's an important question, isn't it? That's an important thing to think about. And in all these conversations that are going on, I think this is relevant and something that needs to be considered. And embracing the fact that the world is global, inviting foreigners to support and help our economy grow, as well as recognizing the current state of need and our cultural identity are going to help us to overcome the problem. But more is more, isn't it? That's my saying. More is more. More people is more. And it's just good to have more at the moment because we are not in a position to be refusing people, actually. Even though some people might be sending a very different message, they might not have the right message. They might have an agenda, mightn't they? I don't know what's going on with my hair. Not thinking about my hair, but yeah, it's kind of a bit random. Anyway, so Japan and Britain aren't doomed by demographics, actually. They're being offered a chance to evolve and change and broaden their scope and their perspective on things and realize that we can solve this problem. And their next era of growth isn't going to come from empire or isolation or birth rates. It's going to be coming from welcoming new people and new ideas. And when nations stop fearing change and start designing for it, they don't lose who they are. They grow into who they could be. My God, doesn't that sound like a little, idiom that we can work with there? Lovely little philosophy that we can all embrace. So both countries have a shared gift, the creativity, humor, and adaptability that made small islands shape the global world. There's obviously a lot of power and influence that we share. And now those same traits can help us reimagine the communities of our countries, and not so much around bloodlines, but around the sense of belonging and strengthening our cultures through unity and diversity, which are great, aren't they? Okay, then. So the big final thoughts is that global aging isn't a tragedy. It's our opportunity to transition. Migration isn't a loss of control. It's how societies regenerate. And Britain and Japan share a choice: shrink behind old myths or grow into global belonging. Hope lives in people, and those people are already arriving. So maybe the real superpower of an island nation isn't keeping the world out, it's knowing when to let them in. So let me know your thoughts on this. Do you think that we should be drawing, parallels with Japan? Do you agree that we have kind of a lot of similarities between us? Do you think there's links into some of the things that I've raised in earlier videos about aging population and some of the problems that we face as a British society? As always, I love hearing your thoughts and your ideas and your responses to this. Again, I'm not telling anybody what to think. I'm just sharing my quirky little deep dive and what I think. That's all for now. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.